Okay, so I'm Tom Oliver. I work at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, an ecological modeller, and lots of my research focuses on the analysis of long-term monitoring data from butterfly populations or other wildlife species. Okay, so for my new study we worked with long-term monitoring data from the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. And we analysed the effects of a severe drought in 1995 on butterfly populations. So we considered how the populations crashed in response to the drought and the rate of recovery, but also importantly how that was affected by the habitat structure and the landscape around the sites. And then we used state-of-the-art climate models to project what the frequency of drought events might be in the future under different emissions, different CO2 emission scenarios. And then combined these projections of droughts with our statistical models based on the observed butterfly responses to try and understand how butterfly populations might fare under these different climate and land use scenarios. In this study we actually analysed as many species as we could. So we analysed 28 butterfly species that occur in Great Britain. Of those, we were quite conservative in our criteria for which we identified species which were particularly drought sensitive. And so there were 6 species, just about a fifth of the ones that we looked at, were identified as drought sensitive. So that was the ringlet, the speckled wood, the green-veined white and large skipper. So these are all actually species that are well known to occur in moister habitats. But then also 2 additional species, the large white and the small white species. And all those species crashed significantly in response to the 1995 drought. So we found that across the 6 species in Great Britain, the projected impacts of climate change were quite severe. I mean, I was quite surprised working with these climate data, quite how many droughts we would be expected in the next, up to 2050 and up to 2100. So initially in the 1995 drought, an event as severe as that in terms of its summer aridity hadn't occurred in the Met Office time series, but under even the low emission scenario those events are projected to occur about every 7 years, and under the high emission scenario, which is actually business as usual, they're predicted to occur effectively every year. And the impact this will have on the butterfly populations is quite severe. So even under the low emission scenario, we're locked into these changes now, where lots of widespread population extinctions are likely to occur. And under the more severe emissions scenario, those extinctions could be quite widespread by the mid-century. So this study was carried out in a collaboration with Butterfly Conservation and Natural England, the University of Exeter. And we found that the habitat around monitoring sites affected the extent and the recovery of the drought impact. So where a site was surrounded by more natural habitat, so woodlands, heathlands, grasslands like you see here, the populations tended to be less impacted by the drought. And also where there was more of this habitat in the wider countryside and it was less fragmented, then the recovery was a lot quicker as well. So in addition to in the longer term, to limiting the impacts on these butterflies from climate change, in addition to reducing our international CO2 emissions, there are things we can do at the national and the local level in terms of restoring habitats and reducing fragmentation to help these butterflies persist. Butterflies are part of our natural heritage. They make our environment a more beautiful place to be in. But in addition, butterflies are sensitive to environmental change and can be good because they're well studied. We have good data on them and we can use them as indicators for what the impacts might be on other species. So they can be a sort of canary in a coal mine, if you will. And we found in this study that 1/5 of butterflies were very drought sensitive. And so if this translates to other groups, bees, beetles, earthworms, these other groups, for those people who are less swayed about arguments about the beauty of the natural environment, these species provide important functions in terms of providing pollination of crops and wildflowers, pest control, control of disease vectors, and helping to decompose waste. So there's a whole range of important functions that these species provide that underpin the well-being and the health of humans. And we should be really alarmed at the potential for climate change to disrupt these functions.